All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're gonna take a look at this report from the Center for Strategic and International Study,
CSIS.
CSIS. Yeah, thank you.
Hmm.
It's called China's Emergence as a Superpower, a graphic comparison of the United States, Russia, China, and other major powers.
Itchy title.
Yeah, very catchy.
Okay.
It came out August 15th of this year and really kind of gets into these big questions of where global power is,
Hmm.
kind of stands now.
Hmm.
And we're going to kind of try to unpack it, the most important takeaways, I guess, about China's rise and what it means for, for us, I guess, and for the world. And what about Russia? And it even gets into this idea of a potential new Cold War.
Well, it's really interesting how the report connects the dots between all these global players.
Yeah.
And, it makes you realize that everything is really intertwined.
Hmm.
So, China's economic moves are impacting U.S. military strategy. The war in Ukraine is shaking things up globally.
Yeah.
There are so many threads that are kind of weaving together.
Hmm.
And I think, one of our goals is to help kind of tease those patterns out for you.
Yeah, makes sense of it all.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in, I guess. The report really emphasizes China's, economic power.
Oh, absolutely.
They may not have overtaken, like all the developed democracies combined or anything like that, but they're definitely nipping at the heels of the U.S., wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is so interesting is that it's not just about the size of their economy.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how they're wielding that power.
Mm-hmm.
So take China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
It's a massive, just massive infrastructure project, but it goes beyond just, building roads and bridges.
Mm.
It's about connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa under China's influence and creating this kind of economic bloc that, operates with its own set of rules.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
sometimes even bypassing those international standards that we in the West typically follow.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't really considered that. So it's like they're creating their own economic sphere of influence, almost like a counterweight to the Western-led world order.
Exactly.
Sure.
That's exactly what they're doing.
Wow.
But of course, China is not without its own internal issues.
Right.
They're facing economic sanctions. There's still fallout from their COVID-19 policies, and even just the challenges that come with, having such strong state involvement in their economic development.
So given all that,
Yeah.
given, some of those internal struggles, do you think China can really maintain this incredible economic growth that we've seen in recent decades?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, and the report dives into some, potential scenarios.
Right.
Like, what happens if China can power through these challenges and keeps growing at this incredible rate? Will we see a kind of economic standoff
Mm.
between, China and its allies on one side, and then you have the developed democracies on the other?
That's a thought-provoking
Yeah.
scenario. Almost like two distinct economic universes competing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about China, but the report also touches on Russia's role in this whole global power shift.
Yep.
And one thing that struck me is that despite being so large and having all these resources, all these natural resources, they're not really seen as an economic superpower on the same level as China or the U.S., are they?
You're right to point that out.
Yeah.
They're not. Russia's economic power has actually been declining
Oh, really?
for a while now. They lost control of many of those former Soviet states after the collapse of the USSR, and, their economic growth, their trade, their investments in research and development, it just hasn't kept pace with the leaders.
So if we're talking about countries that wield true global economic power, Russia isn't really at the top of the list.
Not really, no.
But of course, there's more to the story than just economic strength.
Of course.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, there's more at play here.
Russia still holds, a very unique position on the world stage.
And it's primarily because of their military strength
Right.
and their nuclear arsenal. They may not be an economic giant,
Right.
but they're certainly still a force to be reckoned with.
Hmm.
And even when it comes to economics, I mean, the future's always uncertain, right?
Yeah.
This report, as comprehensive as it is, it doesn't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
There are factors beyond just the hard data that could dramatically reshape things.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, for one, the internal politics and economic stresses within the developed nations,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that could have a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing, growing populism and internal divisions
Right.
in many Western democracies, and that could weaken their economic power and their global influence.
Yeah, I can see that. A house divided against itself.
Exactly.
So what else?
Well, you also have demographic shifts and population
Hmm.
pressures. Those are major factors, too. Countries with aging populations and declining birth rates, like many in Europe,
Yeah.
they're likely to face economic challenges, right? Whereas those with rapidly growing populations, like India, could see their economic power surge in the coming years.
Okay, so we've got potential internal problems within the developed countries. We've got, this wild card of, population growth in other parts of the world.
Mm.
Definitely adds, layers of complexity to the equation.
Oh, absolutely.
What about climate change? Surely that has to play a role.
Of course, the looming impact of global warming is impossible to ignore.
Hmm.
I mean, we're already seeing the economic consequences of extreme weather events,
Yeah.
resource scarcity, and those effects are only going to intensify in the coming decades.
Yeah, it seems like depending on how effectively countries can address those challenges or fail to address them,
Yeah.
that could create huge winners and losers in the economic landscape.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And then you have the crucial factor of cooperation,
Mm-mm.
or lack thereof, among the developed democracies. A united front versus a fragmented one. That could make all the difference when it comes to tackling these global economic challenges and maintaining a stable world order.
So we've got all these potential scenarios, internal pressures, demographic shifts, this big question mark of, will democracies work together or fall apart?
Mm-hmm.
The unpredictable consequences of climate change.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're looking at this giant, complex puzzle with pieces constantly shifting and changing.
Mm.
My head's spinning a little bit.
Yeah, it is a lot to process.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway here is that there's so many unknowns when it comes to predicting the future of economic power.
Yeah.
This report provides a valuable snapshot of the current landscape, but it also highlights just how much is in flux,
Right.
how much is, beyond our control.
Makes sense.
And this brings us to a really fascinating question
Okay.
that the report, doesn't really explore this too deeply.
Mm-hmm.
What about the rise of other players,
Like who?
like India,
Oh, right.
with its massive population,
Yeah.
rapidly growing GDP? India has the potential to become a major force
Yeah.
in the global economy.
I mean, yeah, we've been so focused on China and the US that we haven't even talked about
Right.
the other potential powerhouses.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we've got this economic tug of war happening.
Yeah.
China's on the rise, the US is facing some internal challenges, and then you've got these wildcard players like India entering the game.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the military side of things?
Yeah.
Because let's be real, I mean, military power still plays a huge role,
Oh, yeah.
especially when we're talking about superpowers.
Oh, absolutely.
So what does the report say about that?
Well, the report is very clear on this point.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. remains the top dog militarily.
Okay.
They have the most experience, they spend the most on defense, and they possess the most technologically advanced forces in the world.
But
But of course, there's a but.
right.
While the U.S. holds the top spot for now,
Mm-hmm.
the report acknowledges that there is rising military competition from China.
Yeah.
It's becoming especially apparent in the Pacific and Indian Ocean regions,
Right.
where China is rapidly modernizing its military and expanding its influence.
And isn't Taiwan like a potential flashpoint
Oh, yes.
in this
Mhm.
rivalry? I mean, the report specifically mentions it
It does.
as an area where things could get very tense.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about raw military power, it's also about
That's about alliances.
alliances and
Right.
partnerships.
Especially in key regions like the Pacific,
Okay.
those alliances are key to countering China's, growing assertiveness.
So we've got China flexing its economic and military muscles, and then you've got Russia, which might not be an economic towerhouse, but it still poses a significant military challenge, particularly for Europe.
Mm-hmm.
What a complicated picture.
It is complex.
And to add to the complexity,
Yes.
we need to remember that this report was published before the war in Ukraine.
Right, before things really escalated.
Yeah, before things really escalated.
Yeah.
So that adds
A whole other layer.
whole other layer of complexity. Yeah.
Right. While the report, highlights these existing tensions between Russia and the West,
Right.
it doesn't really fully capture the impact of that conflict on the global balance of power.
Mm.
And, we're seeing the U.S. and its allies basically engaged in what is effectively a proxy war with Russia
Mhm.
by providing, significant military support to Ukraine.
It's almost like a high-stakes chess game where
Yeah,
the pieces are constantly moving
constantly.
and the players are, making these calculated risks.
Exactly.
And this brings us to this concept of a new Cold War
Yes.
emerging between the US and Russia.
hmm
The report, even before the Ukraine conflict, kind of alludes to this possibility fueled by, you know, Putin's view of NATO as a threat to Russian interests. So just to recap, we've got potential economic standoffs, rising military tensions, and the possibility of a new Cold War. And if that wasn't enough,
Right.
we also need to factor in the nuclear dimension.
Yes,
The report reveals that a new nuclear arms race is underway.
it is.
Hold on, we need to unpack that.
Okay.
What exactly is driving this new arms race?
Well, I think there are a few key factors at play here.
Okay.
Firstly, the breakdown of arms control agreements
Mm-hmm.
between the U.S. and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
That's created this, environment of mistrust and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty,
Right.
which eliminated an entire class of nuclear missiles,
Mm-hmm.
that was abandoned back in 2019.
So without these agreements in place, both sides are basically free to develop and deploy new nuclear weapons.
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
And that's creating a very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
And secondly, we're seeing a potential resurgence of what are called tactical nuclear weapons.
Tactical nuclear weapons, what are those?
So these are smaller,
Okay.
less powerful nuclear weapons that are designed for use on the battlefield,
Mm.
as opposed to, the massive strategic nukes that are intended to, wipe out entire cities.
Okay, but why is that particularly concerning? Aren't smaller nukes less dangerous?
Well, not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with tactical nukes is that they lower the threshold
Mm-hmm.
for using nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So if a conflict were to escalate, it becomes much easier to justify using a smaller tactical nuke
Right.
than it would be to, launch a city-destroying strategic weapon.
Right.
So it increases the risk of a nuclear conflict, even if it starts out as a conventional war.
It's like a slippery slope.
Exactly.
Once somebody uses one, it
It could spiral.
quickly spiral out of control.
Yeah, that's why this resurgence of tactical nukes is so worrying.
Mm.
It adds another layer of complexity and danger
Yeah.
to this already volatile global landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings us back to Russia.
Right. Right.
You mentioned earlier that their superpower status is tied to their nuclear arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they're lagging behind economically,
Right.
their inherited nuclear arsenal from the Soviet era
Mm-hmm.
gives them a significant, amount of leverage on the global stage.
Yeah.
It's a potent reminder that power isn't just about, economic output
Right.
or even military strength.
Mm-hmm.
It's also about, the perceived ability to inflict damage.
Yeah.
And in Russia's case, that ability is very much tied to their vast nuclear arsenal.
That is a sobering thought.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot to consider here. China's economic rise, Russia's military threat, the return of nuclear concerns, the impact of the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process, but I feel like we're not even done yet.
We're just getting started.
Yeah, there's more to unpack here.
Definitely
I
lots
know.
more.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
Keep going.
keep digging in.
Yes.
All right.
Oh yeah, tons more to dig into.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's it's easy to get caught up in the, kind of the economic and military stuff, but it's those nuclear concerns.
That are really unsettling.
Yeah.
It reminds us of how high the stakes are
Yeah.
in this whole global power game.
You're right. It is a stark reminder that, the world isn't all just about trade deals and, military budgets.
Right.
This threat of nuclear conflict really kind of hangs over everything.
It does.
And you mentioned earlier that Russia's superpower status is tied to their nuclear arsenal. They might not be an economic giant, but they inherited this massive nuclear capability from the Soviet era.
Exactly. And that's one of the key insights, I think, from the CSIS report, is that it forces us to grapple with the fact that power isn't one-dimensional. It's about the perception of threat, the ability to inflict damage, and the willingness to use those tools,
Yeah.
even nuclear weapons.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. China's economic rise, Russia's military threat, these renewed nuclear concerns. It's a complex picture. If we were to distill this report down to its essence, what would you say are like the most crucial takeaways for our listener?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we're living in a multipolar world.
Okay.
You know, Gone are the days of a single superpower dictating the global order.
Right.
We have multiple centers of power now, each with its own interests, its own ambitions, all kind of vying for influence.
And those competing interests are bound to create some friction, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's economic competition between China and the US or military tension between Russia and NATO,
Hmm.
these power struggles, I mean, they're going to shape the 21st century.
They will. There's no question about it.
And so it's critical for us to understand those dynamics,
Hmm.
right? To be aware of those potential flashpoints, the areas where conflict could erupt, and to think critically about how alliances and partnerships can help us navigate this really complex landscape.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we need to be prepared for a world that's going to be a lot less predictable,
Yeah.
a lot more volatile,
Hmm.
and potentially more dangerous than what we've been used to.
That's a pretty fair assessment, I think.
Yeah, I think so. But that doesn't mean we should give in to fear or despair, right?
Okay.
It means we need to engage with these issues. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to participate in shaping the future that we want to see.
I like that, being informed, staying engaged, not being passive bystanders in this whole global drama.
Exactly.
Like, we all have a role to play, even if it's just staying informed and making our voices heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And this deep dive into the CSIS report is a great starting point.
Yeah.
It gives us that foundation for understanding the major players, the key trends, and the potential challenges that lie ahead.
So, if we're potentially facing two Cold Wars, one with Russia, one with China, how will this impact future global alliances? Could we see a shift in global partnerships as countries are forced to choose sides? Or will new, unexpected alliances emerge as nations try to navigate this increasingly complex world?
Those are excellent questions, and I think, honestly, there are no easy answers.
Right.
I mean, the future is inherently uncertain, right?
Yeah.
But I think by understanding the forces at play, we can better anticipate potential outcomes and make more informed decisions.
Hmm.
This report doesn't necessarily offer us, a roadmap,
Mm-hmm.
but it does provide a compass.
Sometimes a compass is all you need to start exploring uncharted territory.
Exactly.
And it feels like we're definitely in uncharted waters here.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this deep dive has been about equipping you, the listener, with that knowledge and insight you need to navigate this complex world.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up, I have one final question for you and for our listeners out there.
Okay.
If these Cold War scenarios do play out, how will it affect global cooperation on issues that really demand collective action? Things like climate change, pandemics, even international terrorism.
All right.
Will we be able to put aside our differences and work together, or will these rivalries kind of paralyze us?
That is a truly thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
And I think it deserves a much deeper look than we can give it here.
Okay.
The future isn't predetermined. It's shaped by the choices that we make, both individually and collectively. So I would encourage you, our listener, to really ponder this question, to seek out more information, and to engage in thoughtful conversations about the future that we want to create.
It's a powerful thought that we have this power to shape the future, even in the face of these daunting global challenges.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder that even though things might seem kind of bleak, we can't afford to give up hope
Right.
or lose sight of our shared humanity.
I completely agree. It's easy to feel overwhelmed
Yeah.
by the scale of these global issues, but we can't let that paralyze us. We have to remember that even small actions can make a difference.
So, like, what are some things that individuals can do realistically to make a positive impact in a world facing these massive interconnected challenges?
Yeah, it's easy to feel helpless, when you think about something like climate change or nuclear proliferation.
Right.
But there are things we can all do.
Mm-hmm.
First, I think staying informed and educated about these issues is crucial. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Right.
The more we understand the complexities of these challenges,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to advocate for change.
Can't solve problems that we don't understand.
Exactly.
So, beyond staying informed, what else can people do?
Well, supporting organizations
Okay.
that are working on the front lines
Mm-hmm.
of these challenges, I think that's another powerful way to make a difference.
Okay.
Whether it's donating to environmental groups, supporting humanitarian aid organizations, or advocating for nuclear disarmament, every contribution, no matter how small,
Yeah.
it can help.
So it's about finding ways to amplify the voices of those who are working to make a positive impact, even if we can't be on the front lines ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can also advocate for policies
Okay.
that promote cooperation and understanding, both locally and globally.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, Supporting international agreements on climate change, promoting diplomacy over military intervention, or advocating for policies that address the root causes of conflict.
Our voices do matter.
It sounds like it's all about engaging with the world around us, not just as passive observers, but as active participants
Yes.
who are willing to speak up, make choices that align with their values, and support those who are working to create a better future.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, understanding the challenges we face, and taking action, however small, to create a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive.
Wow, that was a lot to take in.
It was.
We covered China's economic rise, Russia's military ambitions, the specter of nuclear conflict, the challenges of a multipolar world. Definitely a lot to think about.
It is.
But I hope this deep dive has given you, the listener, a better understanding of these complex forces that are shaping our world. It's not about having all the answers.
Right. It's about asking the right questions
Mm-hmm.
and engaging in thoughtful dialogue.
I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. It's been my pleasure.
And a huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey of discovery. Remember, the future is not set in stone. We all have a role to play in shaping it, so stay curious, stay engaged, and keep exploring. Until next time.
It really is a lot to process. We're talking about these potential economic standoffs and military buildups and the, turn of nuclear anxieties and all this against this backdrop of a multipolar world where power is shifting and nobody seems to have the answers.
It's like we're at this crossroads, right? Facing all these challenges that demand global cooperation. But at the same time, we're dealing with these intense rivalries
Right.
that seem to pull everyone in opposite directions. It's like a paradox of our time.
It really is. It feels like we need a whole new playbook for this world. The old rules of engagement, the traditional alliances and rivalries,
Right.
they just don't seem to apply anymore.
I agree. We need a new way of thinking about global politics. One that recognizes just how interconnected everything is.
We can't compartmentalize issues anymore. Economic decisions have military ramifications, environmental policies, impact global trade.
Right.
I mean, it's all intertwined.
And that makes it even harder to predict the future, right?
Absolutely.
Because any action, any decision
Right.
can trigger these ripple effects across so many different areas.
It's like a giant game of chess
Yeah.
where every move can potentially reshape the entire board.
And the players aren't always predictable or rational.
No, they're not.
Right.
They have their own, internal pressures, their own agendas.
Right.
Sometimes they make moves that seem completely counterproductive
Yeah.
or even self-destructive.
So how do we even begin to navigate this kind of world? It feels overwhelming, like we're just caught in this current, being swept along with no control.
It's definitely a challenge, but I think the first step is awareness.
Okay.
We need to understand those forces at play, the motivations of the major players,
Yeah.
the potential risks and opportunities. That's why, these deep dives are so valuable. They provide a framework for understanding, a lens through which we can view this complex world.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
At least a good starting point.
Yeah.
But what about action? What can we as individuals actually do to influence these global events?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
I think it starts with engagement.
Okay.
We need to stay informed. We need to participate in the political process, hold our leaders accountable,
Okay.
support organizations that are working to address these global challenges, advocate for policies that promote cooperation and understanding, use our voices to amplify these messages of peace and collaboration.
So it's not about feeling powerless or giving into despair. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play,
We do.
even if it seems small.
Yeah.
Every choice we make, every conversation we have
Right.
can contribute to shaping the future.
I agree. Completely agree. And I think that's a powerful message to end on. The future is not predetermined. It's shaped by the choices that we make,
Right.
both individually and collectively. So let's choose wisely. Let's act with intention. Let's strive to create a world that is more just, more peaceful, and more sustainable.
I love that. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise
It's been my pleasure.
and for helping us make sense of this really complex world.
Yeah, it is a complex world.
It is. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into, the world of global power dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
Me too.
Remember to stay curious, stay engaged, and keep exploring the world around you. Until next time.